joined today by Jez Rose. Jez, how are you?
I'm lovely. I'm always lovely.
I know you're always lovely. But listen, I was thinking in my head, how do I describe Jez? How do I intro Jez? How do you intro yourself?
That is a very good question. Fundamentally, I'm a behaviour insight advisor who for 21 years this year, happy birthday me, thanks, has worked with most of the Fortune 500 companies. I've advised almost all the Fortune 100 companies in helping them, the organisations and the people in them, get bigger results. That is it in a nutshell.
But within that, there's so much to say. Because personal life, kind of the life that you've led and the choices you've made, like so intrinsically feed into who you are and what you speak about and everything like that. Are you conscious of your person as a whole, or is it kind of you live life just going through it?
Oh gosh, that's a big question.
I know, but
So what I'm fundamentally conscious of is that we only get, because I have a background in medicine, we only get today is guaranteed, right? That this moment is the only moment that's guaranteed. And that's sort of what frustrates me a little bit about the way that corporate mentality has been misled into thinking about 5 and 10 year plans. And those strategies, those growth strategies, are great for focusing us and motivation and inspiration, but it is often at the loss of the moment and making the moment now count and thinking about what's the difference I can make right now. How can I be happier right now? How can we grow right now? So I'm really conscious of making the best of every moment and getting clients to that as well. But you're right. I mean, I did 8 years working as a TV presenter in children's television and then moved into mainstream television. So that super helps with stuff like this, but also on stage and hosting and all that kind of jazz. The books, 2 of them have done really well, so that means that I write a lot and there's a lot of publicised stuff. I'm probably best known from a website perspective and from our relationship for speaking, but there's a ton of hosting stuff and the consultancy work and the training and learning and development side of the business is huge as well. So it's difficult when someone says, what do you do? I'm like, how do I find a generic enough thing that makes them ask questions and then we can have the conversation, right?
So let me answer what you just said. One of the interesting things about the pandemic was everyone was focusing on the moment. Yes. And last year, very much from my perspective, is companies started kind of trying to get themselves out of are we going to survive the next day? And everything, to say, okay, we've got to start thinking strategically. From your perspective and everything you just said, were we almost better off just thinking in the moment? And do companies need to switch out, or should they stay looking at that?
That's a great question. So 5 and 10 year plans and broader long-term plans, super important strategically, particularly commercially for obvious reasons, right? However, people don't work very well in that format because a 5-year plan doesn't have regular enough intervals of reinforcement or dopamine hits, or it's just too far. I mean, imagine saying in 5 years, I'm going to lose 3 stone. I mean, it's just, within 3 months, you just lose all momentum because you wouldn't see or feel any different, right? Because you're giving yourself too long. So 5 and 10 year plans, long-term strategic plans, super important, but they sort of need to be parked as a strategic plan. The next bit is, okay, so what about now? What's the difference I'm going to make today that's going to help feed into that? And in 3 weeks' time, and in 5 weeks' time, and it's, the slightly watered down answer equivalent is people that have annual award ceremonies. I mean, God, it was 2024, and it really irritates me that you're going to wait a year before you congratulate or reinforce or reward that behaviour. I say ditch the annual award ceremonies and make them much more at regular intervals, so that constantly it's spotting and finding the behaviours that you want to reinforce and encourage all the time. So then you create a culture actually that is constantly looking for the positives, constantly celebrating and evaluating the good things that we're doing all the time, rather than sort of saying, well done, I'll put a good word in for the award ceremony, and then 11 months later someone stood on a thing with a certificate going, I'm not really sure why I'm here.
So just to be a bit adversarial, kind of not necessarily believing it, but does then not you run into the concern that because you're constantly rewarding, actually the dopamine hit of the reward gets less and less? And so the reason companies look at it in terms of we want to do that one-off big thing is so actually people really feel it at that moment. And how do you kind of balance that up?
It's logical, but it's not correct. So it's not how our brains work, it's not how our behaviour works. So the flip side of that, to sort of put it into context, in the UK, there are slightly different stats for the US, but it's similar pretty much globally. In the UK, the reoffending rate fluctuates between sort of 72 and 85%. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the current legal system, the current punitive system, doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because people go to prison and then they reoffend. Why is that? Super simple. Because you trip up an old lady and run her for their handbag, and you might not get in prison or any sort of sentence for 18 months, 6 months, 2 years. I mean, okay, so let's put that behaviour in a broader context. Yep. Imagine you park illegally and 6 months later your car bursts into flames. Well, you wouldn't think it was because you parked illegally, but if every time you parked illegally or swore, your hand burst on fire or something, you'd stop doing it pretty quickly, right? There's a reason why you don't get a hot iron and put it to your face or stick your hand in an oven, because it hurts. The feedback's instant. So it's really important that whatever behaviour you want more of, you feed it. Whatever behaviour you want less of, you restrict it or punish it.
Yeah.
And that has to happen all the time, not just once a year.
So let me ask you the follow-up question, which is, you've been saying this for 21 years, as you just said, and every time I've heard you speak, it was like, Jez speaks the truth, he's a truth teller. What is it that us as humans that we don't actually just take Jez's advice and do the right thing and go down the path which will make our life?
Well, I mean, so firstly, I must say, to protect the clients that I work with really closely and have done for, I mean, some clients I've had longer than 10 years, there are lots of organisations and groups and teams and leaders that are doing the right things and do get great results because they understand human behaviour. I think there are two broad answers to your question. One is, generally speaking, we're very lazy as human beings. So if it's a tiny bit of hard work, we just think, I don't think I can, I'd rather, look, there's a course I'll go on, that will teach me how to do it for me, or there's a pill, or there's some surgery, but actually it's not really hard work. It's like anything. If you don't know what you're doing, it seems a bit overwhelming, and so you just give up. It's just easier to say, I'll just do nothing. Easiest thing in life is do nothing. But with a tiny bit of understanding and effort, suddenly actually it becomes a bit more, a bit more interesting for people, but actually the output is so much greater that in itself is rewarding. It's like anything, you just learn. If you gave me knitting now, I'd have no idea how to knit. I mean, I'd have holes in me, there'd be wool everywhere. It would be funny to watch.
It would be funny to watch. Like, I'm confused. Okay, immediately after this is my plan.
But for me, it'd be very stressful. But if you teach me how to do it, it's like the old medical model, see one, do one, teach one. That's how we become better. So it's just, my point is, tiny bit of effort at the top end. If you invest in yourself, understanding why we do what we do and how to make it better, and if you're in leadership, why they do what they do and how to make it better, tiny bit of investment. The comet trail that I talk about a lot is massive. So I think partly it's laziness, and also we've been fed in the corporate world that there are systems and models and processes we should follow because, I don't know, everybody else is, or Harvard 20 years ago came up with this idea of a leadership model, so that's the way we should do it, and no one's ever challenged that.
And does that challenge come from leadership of these companies actually just changing, or does it come from smaller companies showing the way forward to the bigger companies?
Yeah, both, I think. Okay. I don't think it's exclusive of one or the other. Because then you're talking about culture then, aren't you? And culture, lots of people that say culture is fed top down, there are lots of people that say culture is fed bottom up. Both of those are nonsense. Culture involves everybody agreeing together on a direction that we're going to go in and how we're going to do it, right? So here's another quick example which sort of puts all of this into context. I love this question, I've been asking it for about 10 years, and it's a real insight, not for me anymore because I know the answer, but for them.
Yeah.
And I will say, how many of you here, say it's one organisation I'm talking to, have a set of values or a corporate vision or some corporate pillars and mission, and they'll all put their hand up, we've got those. Yeah. And then I will say, and I've already done my research, I know what they are, I know exactly what their mission is, I tried to learn it off by heart, and I would say, okay, so how many of you know them off by heart? Yeah. And less than 0.5% of the audience will put their hand up. And so my point, which I say openly, is, so what's the point? Yeah. What's the point in having corporate values and a corporate mission if none of you actually know what they are off by heart? But more importantly, you've got to be able to name a behaviour in order to get it. So you can't, your mission can't be, Stealth Incorporated and customer first.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does customer first mean? And what it means to you will be different to me. So if you haven't explained what the behaviours are that support those values, you'll never get them. So I think a lot of it is about just unpicking stuff more. We don't ask enough questions.
Yeah.
I'm back to that again. Don't get me started on the fact that we don't ask enough questions, because we'll be here all day.
Well, let me ask you one last question. And it kind of ties into the whole thing, because I got given a great quote, I think, by Georgie in our team. She said that you said about you purchased a small decommissioned farm.
Yeah.
And you said the worst thing you've ever done in your life, but equally the most rewarding.
Yes.
You talk about kind of small steps of consent. Like, what made you make that big decision, and explain why that was. At what point you realised it was rewarding, even though it was.
Hell.
Yes, there you go.
13 weeks to bankruptcy, Nick. That's a title of my biography, maybe.
Yeah. I'll hold you to that one.
Yes. What made me do it? At the time, I grew up in the countryside. I've always loved outdoors and gardening, and there was that little voice in the back of my head that knew that there were incredible untapped impact that we hadn't really sort of discovered enough of, with regards to how nature can make a difference to human health, well-being and behaviour. And there were a lot of people saying, oh, it's good for your health, or, it lowers your blood pressure. And I thought, but surely there's more evidence than that. And I looked through, and there was a massive study done in the 70s, and then pretty much nothing until 2017-ish. So we started to conduct research into exactly how does nature have an impact on human health, well-being and behaviour. And so, for example, you're left with a dilapidated farm that you have great visions for, and you realise that there's 100 or more things on your to-do list. 95 of them involve significant investment that you weren't aware of when you bought the place.
Yes.
And it's pretty demoralising, right? And so you pick the easy ones, like sweet leads, and then you're back to the invest £27,000 in a septic system, and you're like, oh damn it, is there not another sweet leads? But I realised, well, hang on, we've got this space, and if we want to see what the evidence is, then we should try it. So we spoke to a local mental health outpatients department, and had 5 or 6 people at the time that were heavily medicated, but were towards the end of their mental health treatment journey as part of a rehabilitation program. So they were about to go and live life out in the big real world again, without the support of a clinical team, and gradually, hopefully, rehabilitate them. And 2 things happened during that 6-month program. One involved a man who there was sort of a bit of commotion going on. We were out doing really perfunctory things like clipping roses or cutting wildflowers or whatever it may be. And there was a bit of commotion. I went over to see the clinician and I said, is everything okay? He said, we're going to have to cut this short. We need to get back. This person has started hearing voices and they need to be in a safe environment. I was like, yeah, fine. So I follow up, and the lead consultant, psychiatrist, calls me and says, I don't know what happens there, but this person has been hearing voices for, however many years.
Yeah.
And since they came to the farm, they have stopped. They have not heard voices anymore. And I remember sitting at my desk thinking, I don't know what that means, but that's phenomenal. And then somebody else who had been in and out of mental health care work for, I'm sure it was about 2 years. He'd been in and out of these programs. And at the end of the sort of exit program, they say, okay, what of all of the things we've done, and they do tons of stuff, like the visit to the farm and the work we were doing was a tiny, tiny bit of it. Lots of other activities and learning how to manage your own finances and cope with emotions and all that kind of jazz. Things that we take for granted.
Yeah.
Right? But this is such a fragile thing we don't protect enough. And on his exit feedback, in 2 years, he'd been to the farm 3 times, so a total of 5 hours worth of rehabilitation with us. And that was the thing that he singled out as the single most powerful thing during his entire treatment program. And that's when I knew we were onto something massive, because if at our lowest and most fragile and vulnerable, this was having such a big impact, imagine what it could do day for day.
Yeah.
And so we were one of the first people that came up with that piece of research that showed that if you can see nature in your environment, if you've got a house plant on your, an indoor plant on your desktop, or a view of nature or something, your productivity and happiness score increases anywhere from 27% to 45% in situ at your desk. So that's why I started to do it.
Yes.
I forget the second part of the question because I spoke for so long.
Well, I think
maybe that's all.
I think that pretty much says it all. I think it's and did you feel kind of by the end of that journey, did you feel like you'd achieved, like, you knew more and you were more
Oh yeah, I mean, the tragedy is that people don't. One of the challenges with psychology and behaviour is that it's all here.
Yes.
There's nothing tangible I can sell you. There's no fancy machine that you can put on the wall and go, "Hey, gang! I mean, this was pretty pricey. Look at the lights and this does all the stuff." I mean,
It's a septic tank.
It's exactly that. You can't see it's underground. It doesn't count. It's not a good example. Don't start again. But everything in here, you can't. There's nothing. You just have to trust me. You have to trust that it works. You have to go through a process with me.
Yeah.
And the people that come out the other side of that process are, I don't want to say enlightened, sounds a bit pious, but there is a moment of, oh wow, there's a different way that I can see, think or feel about this. That has a massive impact on how I communicate with other people, how I manage stress, how I solve problems, the types of questions I ask. So, yeah, the response was, like nothing I ever imagined it would be. But it fundamentally changed how I then went about living my life and how actually I changed working with my clients as well. Changed the way that I speak to them during presentations, but more importantly, the expectations I have of my clients and how quickly they can achieve something is a bit more kind of, measured.
Level. Jez, as always, it's been lovely speaking to you.
Far too short. Is that it?
We've gone for hours. We do it off camera anyway for hours. Like,
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
It's been lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.